What's up, YouTube? Today I want to talk about Zebralette3 by uHe. So this is a free plugin. It's not actually a full synthesizer. It's basically a smaller component of their larger Zebra plugin, which is their sort of flagship plugin. Zebra 3 hasn't officially been launched. They've kind of launched a beta for the light version of Zebra, which we're going to dive into today. I wouldn't usually do these kinds of tutorial videos with plugins that aren't planning to be launched anytime soon. However, I've been so excited with Zebralette3 and using it so often in my sound design that I want to talk about a couple of techniques that I've been using, and I want to talk about how sort of different this is to a lot of the other synths on the market, and actually how usable such a simplistic kind of thing is, because it's basically just one oscillator, one MACG, and some really basic effects. Most of the time I don't even use the effects. I kind of just use it as an oscillator and use most of the DAW's built-in effects, which we're going to look at today. Anyway, I want to discuss a couple of techniques that I've been using, which are actually really simple to get some more complex modern bass sounds out of the plugin. So yeah, let's dive in and have a look. So I don't want to dive too much into the technology behind Zebralette3. I just want to discuss why I think it's very different to a lot of the other sort of options on the market. And I'm going to be using Vital as the main comparison, because a lot of us know through the Vital wavetable editor a little bit about additive synthesis, or at least what the concept of additive synthesis is. So if we open the wavetable editor in Vital, we zoom out a little bit. If you didn't know, this represents the frequency of the sound. So you can actually cut out all the high frequency, just play low frequency, and kind of use this section as a filter. So how you would generally kind of use this to create wavetables is you would just draw in your shapes, etc. Right? I guess in a very crude sense of the term, this is additive synthesis because you're controlling each partial. However, the main difference is that it's not in real time. You basically create the patch and then it writes it to a wavetable, and then you can edit it in several different ways. So Vital is a little bit different to a lot of the other wavetable synths on the market in that you do have a couple of spectral effects, but I believe those just edit the way that these partials are distributed. It doesn't actually play with the partials in real time. And I guess that's the biggest difference with something like Zebralette3, is that it does have a very similar wavetable system where it renders these shapes down to a wavetable, which you can then morph from A to B or several different spots in between. But you've also got this additive mode. And essentially what that does is that allows you to synthesize each of the partials in the harmonic series, and you can actually choose how many partials here using this like harmonics drop-down menu. And then furthermore, you actually have control over how those partials kind of interact using these different oscillator effects over here. Okay, so like I said, I'm not going to get too into the technology behind it. That was just a kind of rough explanation as to, I think, why it's so special. Now I want to show you a couple of really cool techniques that we can use to make some kind of sick sounds. So one of the simplest methods to kind of grasp is using the oscillator effects Delta X, which is essentially an FM synthesizer where the actual effects system has a sine wave and allows you to FM it with this waveform, right? And so what we could do is we could kind of just open this editor over here and just scribble in a waveform using this paintbrush tool like this. Kind of just scribble in a waveform, and then we can use the effects to create an FM of a sine wave to that, right? And so bear in mind now, we can create several different curves. So by default, we have these two, which is the saw wave and the triangle. But we can actually create several different curves, and then it'll basically just kind of modulate between them using this curve morph over here. Another really cool thing that's pretty special about Zebralette is because it kind of uses this additive system, you can actually choose how these nodes sweep from the one curve to the other curve. So for this example, let me just turn this Delta X off so we can see this exact shape, right? And so here in this morph menu over here, we can actually choose different styles. So crossfade would be like the traditional wavetable style where it just crossfades based on the amplitude. But you can actually choose, you know, how to crossfade each of these nodes and which point it kind of goes to using the editor, which is really, really cool. So you can kind of create these not only custom wavetables, but the way that the wavetables sweep from one to the other is also customized. Okay, so here we are still in the wavetable renderer mode, and we can switch it to the additive mode like this. And another thing to remember is that in additive mode, the phase randomization is a little bit different to the traditional one that we know. Wavetable phase random, basically every time the note is triggered, its note start is at a different phase cycle. Whereas in the additive mode, every partial's phase is randomized. So you get a little bit more of a almost robotic comb filtery type of sound. But if you want a more static sound, you can set it to reset. And so using the harmonics and the resolution, we can actually fine-tune the sound of the additive synthesizer. So basically what I mean is sometimes you don't want too much high frequency. Say, for example, you're making a bass sound. You can kind of use the partials like a filter. If you want less high frequencies, you can just choose less partials. In this case, sometimes some high frequencies is quite nice to add some texture to the sound though. And it's similar with the resolution. Sometimes you don't want that really high fidelity sound. And sometimes it doesn't really make a difference whether it's 2K or 800 Hertz, depending on the key or the pitch that you're working in. If it's a bass sound and you're at a lower pitch, maybe you want some higher resolution, but that also is at the expense of CPU usage. So it's not always a better idea to just boost this for better quality because you may not always hear the difference. Cool. Okay, so let's put this delta X back here. Okay, that is sick. So here what we can do is we can use the wrap and zap, which is basically like a way of controlling the amplitude of the sound. So there's different types. Mirror, I think, does like a wavefold type of thing. We can use soft clip, which is a pretty cool thing to kind of like make things sound louder straight out the plugin. What I want to do here is I want to set the index to modulator +1. That way we can kind of control the octave of the modulator and the carrier in the FM synth. And we can kind of use that to switch it up a bit. So what we could do here is we could add a little bit of wave shaping using Bitwig's Filter Plus. So if you don't have this, you could use any kind of distortion plugin that you have. I like to add a little bit of chorus before the distortion, and then I'll usually turn the speed or the depth down just so that there's not much modulation happening in the chorus. It's just kind of adding a bit more kind of tail to the sound. Okay, that is sick. So like I said, I often just like to use this as the kind of like oscillator in a patch. Like you can hear that sound, that texture is really, really nice for kind of growly bass sound. But because we've used up all of these oscillator effects, and technically Zebralette doesn't actually have a traditional filter, we could use the third-party plugins for that. So again, if you don't have Bitwig, you could just add an extra filter after this. But I mean, here with Filter Plus, we have the wave shaping and the wave shaping and the filter kind of built in one, so we could just add modulation to this if we needed. Okay, so the next method is a little bit obscure. It makes use of this source system over here, curve geometry or curve spectrum. Basically what this does is that uses this shape instead of as a wave shape, but it uses it as a representation of the spectrum. So this is interesting because it allows us to create this kind of like weird harmonic distortion kind of bases, but also all sorts of other formanty stuff. So quickly, let's just switch this over to Curve Spectrum. Let's jump over to the editor. And for something like more formanty, we would just draw in, let's just say like 3 spikes over here. But something you'll notice is that the spikes are going like pretty high in the amplitude. But that's because, generally speaking, the frequency spectrum is represented kind of non-linearly. So we can kind of counteract that a little bit by just reducing some of the peaks like this, or we could just clip it using that wrap and zap effect that I was talking about earlier. I want to use a combination of both. So I don't want to clip it too hard, but at the same time, just a bit of clip for that kind of throaty effect. Okay, right. So here, let's select all of these points. Let's right click and say copy. Let's go over here, select the points, paste. And so now what we can do is we can move these points a little bit like this to change the formant spread of the wave shape. And we can do various things, like we can right click over here and say paste from clipboard, and that's going to add that original curve back in, and we can edit it some more. So there are also various kind of different warping tools over here, like warp exponential, which is pretty cool for this kind of thing, but because it allows you to kind of like shift the shapes like this. So let's just say copy all of these and paste it again here, paste from clipboard. And then we can just kind of warp them a little bit like this to kind of get a bit different formant spreads going on. And so here we're still in wavetable mode. So if we set it to additive and reset, because each partial is getting generated, we get a slightly cleaner sound. Okay, so anyway, what I want to do is just init this. So I actually wanted to explain how we could use this to create like these harmonic bass sounds. So over here, you can actually change how the grid is displayed. This method basically displays the partials in nonlinear fashion. So that allows you to actually isolate each partial. Oh yeah, we're in warp mode. We want to be in this mode over here. And isolate each partial and boost it. So for example, if we just put a boost on the first harmonic, right? And then we set it to spectrum mode, we get a sine wave. And if we shift this, instead of the first to the second harmonic, then naturally we get 2 sine waves, right? Or a sine wave that's like an octave up. And so using this technique, we can kind of like carve out individual harmonics and boost them for that kind of like harmonic bass sound, right? So the idea with this is to find the spot that you want and then create the shape which morphs from like the sine wave to the harmonic sine wave. So this works best with some kind of soft clip or something like that. Sick. Okay, so here what we want to do is let's just copy this entire shape. Let's paste this here. And then on the last, let's go all the way up. On the first, let's go all the way down. And so I believe that the curves, because there's the same amount of nodes, if we say point by point, it's going to automatically assign them to shift how we need. Yeah, so it's going to add those points rather than morphing like a traditional wavetable or other sort of different methods which might be more experimental, which shifts the phase, etc. So point by point would keep the phase intact because each partial just shifts upwards in volume. I don't know if that's making sense. I might be just blabbering, but... So essentially, like this technique that we're doing here is a technique that you often use multiple oscillators for, and a distortion, and all sorts of other things. But we're doing this entire sound just in the spectral domain, which I find fascinating. So this curve morph now becomes the amount of harmonic distortion. Perfect. So what we could do here is we could just assign the MSCG to this modulation. And now we could draw in an interesting shape over here. So I usually like to set this to 16ths. So it's faster, just straight off the bat. And let's put in some loop markers over here. Oh, so this is, by default, it's bipolar. So we actually want to set this to the center to get the full range. Nice. Okay, so I want to use the combination of that chorus and distortion, but here I've actually got it like all in a rack. Basically, this is chorus, distortion, wider by Polyverse, some blurs, which is a built-in plugin in Bitwig, some EQ, limiter. Oh, very nice. Okay, so the last technique is probably the weirdest of the lot because it involves applications which aren't even in the DAW, but I'll explain that. So this works best if you have a bunch of wavetables or samples and that kind of thing, because Zebralette actually supports sample input. However, big disclaimer, try not to import stereo samples because I found that it often crashes the plugin. And also stick with very short samples. So that's why I say wavetables often work the best for this. So I'm actually going to just drag in some wavetables from my collection on my hard drive. So depending on the size of the file and how much harmonic content there is in the file, it might take several seconds to load. Okay, once it's loaded, we want to use this morph to find the best kind of part of the wavetable. Okay, it's kind of all samey. So what I want to do is just copy this, and then we can actually open Notepad. I'm sure any text editing software will work if you don't have Notepad, if you're on another operating system. And you can actually just paste that information straight into Notepad, which is pretty weird. And you'll see it retains all this data in hexadecimal about the sort of placement of the nodes. So now what we want to do is we want to copy this. We can actually init this patch. And we want to make a sine wave over here. So how we do that is we can actually just select this. We can select this triangle and we can say select all these points, and we can right click and we can use this cinematic function. Basically that just turns things into more of a curved shape. And here what we want to do is we want to paste the data from the notepad. And so now we can actually create a morph between the sine wave and that more complex wavetable which we've imported. So this doesn't always work, but I would say jumping in and actually editing this sort of morph system over here is where the real magic happens with these kinds of patches. So sometimes I often just end up using traditional wavetable mode because you'll see it just kind of uses the amplitude for that. And so here let's just add in the good old soft clip. We already have pretty decent bass sound going on. Try additive mode. So another interesting thing about the additive mode compared to like the traditional wavetable stuff is the spectral distortion. My favorite one is the harmonic clusters. Basically, I think what this does is this basically just hones into specific octaves or pitches in the range and then boosts those as opposed to the others. And you can choose which range using this cluster select over here. So it's important to keep in mind that these often sound best in increments of tens. So it kind of does a weird pitch thing. 10 it sounds good again, 20 it sounds good again, etc. Okay, let's give this curve morph some movement. We could just use a traditional LFO, or we could use the MSEG again. So there is a filter built in here. So you could either use this filter, which is just like traditional filter models, or you could use curve filter, which is a really interesting thing because it allows you to actually draw in your own custom filter models over here in the shape editor. So if we go to the pencil tool and click on the guides over here, this allows us to draw in custom filters. So we could draw in like a kind of formant-ish thing like this, and then sweep the frequency of that filter. But say, for example, we just want a traditional simple filter, like a low pass, we can do that here. Okay, so that might not be too interesting to you. I'm just going to show you another couple of bass sounds that I used similar methods to create. These will be part of some preset pack that I'll release in the future, but only probably once the actual plugin has officially been launched. I also used the very similar techniques to create these bass sounds here in this track. that's about it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you want more Zebralette stuff, also let me know in the comments. And yeah, if you haven't yet, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.